Hi and welcome to another YouTube video. 1 year ago, on the 14th of June 2020, I uploaded my first YouTube video, which was one of the best decisions that I've ever made. And so to celebrate today, I want to talk about everything that I've learned about building in The Sims 4 throughout this year, or in general through my process of learning and getting better as a builder. And I've learned so much, and there are so many different ideas for tutorials that I had, so I thought I would just compile them all in this one anniversary celebration video and share with you everything that I've learned. And I hope that you're down for it, and I hope you're going to have so much fun and learn a little bit with this video. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about landscaping, which is one of my favorites of the entire process of building in The Sims. And so first I'm going to talk about the terrain tool in general, how you use it and which benefits it has, and then I'm going to talk to you about how to make ponds and rivers, how to create bridges and waterfalls. Then I talk about my process of how I go about terrain paint and what different uses there are for it, and then just general stuff like laying out fields of flowers and how to use landscaping as a background. Okay, so first of all, if you have the tool mod or if you have access to the tool mod, don't be scared of the terrain tool. The terrain tool can do so much for you, can give your build so much interest and just raise it up and really create focal points. So the terrain tool is amazing. But if you don't have access to the tool mod, you should be careful with the terrain tool. So you should maybe think about having large spaces that are one height and just more have steps of terrain and not really have gradual terrain, because without the tool mod you often get floating trees, floating flowers, floating just everything. And so if you don't have the tool mod, you sadly can't fix these floating things, and then the terrain tool can be quite tricky. But if you can, if you play The Sims on PC and could get access to the tool mod, I think that using the terrain tool is just fun and amazing. And now I'm going to talk about how I use the terrain tool. So what I start with is I raise up to the highest point. Oftentimes the highest point is the point where I want my build to be, because I of course want the build to be the focal point. So first I'm just going to raise it up until I am at that level where I want the build to be, and then I use this tool that flattens the entire area around it to be one height. So I basically go around it until I have as much space as I need for the build in the end, if I already know that. Otherwise I can also adjust it later. And then I go down the sides of this raised up area, and I also use the platform tool. So platforms is what I call terrain that is on different heights but has the same height in that area. And so I create these different steps, which is for me an easy way to, I don't know, work with terrain in general. And then I use this other tool that smoothes out the terrain. So with this tool I go around the areas of my different platforms and smooth them out where I want them to. For example, where I want a path to be, or just in other areas where I want a smooth incline in terrain, or even you can also build a house where you go downwards. So yeah, just smooth it out. And also another thing that is very helpful and useful with the terrain tool is to go to the softest brush and the lowest intensity to work with the detail and not have the terrain be too overwhelming or too extreme very fast. Okay, next up I'm going to talk about how to make ponds and rivers. It looks like we're going to get ponds and rivers with the terrain tool in cottage living, but for now you can still make your own custom ponds and rivers with the pool tool. So what you can do is take the pool and you create a shape that looks as organic as possible. You can do that with lots of different bump outs that you smooth out with diagonals, because if it goes out in a 90-degree angle, it's just harder for it to look natural. So go with lots of diagonals and just a shape that isn't really I don't know, isn't really too perfect, but just like a little bit wonky. And then what I usually do when I have placed down my shape of the river or the pool is that I use one of the borders that we got with Jungle Adventure. But even if you don't have Jungle Adventure, it actually doesn't matter, because what you do in the next step is that you cover out, you cover around the outside, so you cover around the border of that river or pool and just put lots of landscaping down, so lots of flowers, lots of grass and just vegetation, and also lots of stones maybe, and then you can frame the river or pond with that, and I think it looks very good at the end. And if you, for example, made a river with this technique, it can happen that now this river flows in front of your build and your Sims need to cross it to get to the build. And for that purpose, you are going to need a bridge. So I'm now going to tell you how you can make a bridge in The Sims. So first, you are going to need to pick out a spot where you want your bridge to be. And then you go to that spot and press Control. If you have a PC, I don't really know about Macs and stuff, but if you have a PC, you press Control and then go to the pool tool and delete exactly that area of the pool, and then in that area or where you want your bridge to be, you place a room, and then you go up one story, and on top of that room you place a porch piece or an item that's I think called a square deck in the catalog, and then you place that on top of that roof of that room, and then you stretch it until it's the same size as the room. Then you delete the room underneath, and now you should be able to freely adjust the height of this porch piece. And when you have found the right height that you want your bridge to be, you can place stairs on both sides of this porch piece. If you want to save a little money, you can press Control again and delete the fence that is on the top on the sides where the two stairs are. So now you've saved a little bit of money, you've got the stairs. Now you can pick out what you want your fence to look like and what you want your floor tiles to look like, and this is kind of the moment where you decide, is this going to be a stone bridge, is this going to be a wooden bridge, is this going to be, I don't know, a fantasy bridge, I don't know. And then when you are done with that, you basically already have a functioning bridge. But what you can still do is decorate a little bit with columns or anything you want. Basically, you can also put a roof onto the bridge, and yeah, just decorate to your heart's content. If you now want to spruce up your river even more, you can place a waterfall in The Sims. And what you're going to do to create a waterfall is you are going to pick Island Living in the packs if you have Island Living. I don't really know if there are other waterfall debug pieces, but I know for sure that there is one in Island Living. If you don't have Island Living, you can skip this chapter, I'm very sorry. But yeah, if you have Island Living, go and choose Island Living in your packs and then type debug into the search bar, and then you're going to see all of the different debug items from Island Living, and there you're going to find one that is very hard to see. It's basically just this turquoise shimmer, and then you're going to pick that turquoise shimmer, and when you're going to drag it out, you're going to see that this is a waterfall. And what you're going to do now is you're going to place this waterfall piece at the place where you want it to be, and then you can adjust the height of the landscape that is at the designated place where you want the waterfall to be, and you're going to adjust the height of the terrain there to kind of fit to the top portion of that waterfall. And then when you've adjusted the terrain around it, you can still decorate it with lots of different stones that go up on the sides of waterfall, and also some nice plants to actually make this waterfall look beautiful. And now that we've laid out the basic terrain shape and also maybe a river, maybe a pond, or maybe none of those if you weren't feeling that for this build, now we can get to the terrain paint, which is also a very, very fun part. So there are different uses for terrain paint. First, I'm going to talk about how I make paths with terrain paint, because I think that's the most common use. And so I will create a path that leads up to my build. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to choose the darkest shade of dirt that I can find, and I'm going to lay out where the path is going to be with said dirt. So first I'm going to do dirt paths, And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to choose a kind of stone that I want the path to be, and with this stone I choose a slightly smaller brush size and also a slightly like I don't know, more blurred out brush, which blends better. And then I go on top of the dirt path with said stone, and what nice effect that this has is that the dirt underneath gives this stone paths a nice natural border, which I think looks very nice to have it kind of divided from the grass or the ground texture that is like in the area around that path. So you have that dirt as a divider, and what I then like to do is to go with like a lighter shade of, for example, a stone path, and go with that in the middle of this path to kind of give it a little bit more depth, so to make it look like the path is kind of curved. So in the middle it's the lightest, which I think looks very nice in some paths. What you also can do if you have broader paths where, for example, you have a farm and you want it to look like there are tractors and stuff driving around there, then it would make sense to also have the dirt layer underneath and then have like a lighter, for example, sand color on top of that, and then go through the middle of this again with a darker color, so that it looks like there are two basically I don't know, two paths for the wheels to go, but this path is meant for humans to walk on, so I like the middle to be a little bit lighter. Then other things that you can do with terrain paint is use them as shading. So when you've got your like shape of the build in place, you can go along the sides of this build with a darker shade of grass, or even with some darker dirt, and create a layer of shading. What you also can do if you have hills like we have here, you can go to like the most top portions of the hill where the sun would hit the most, and you can choose a lighter like a lighter grass color, and then put some highlights in your terrain, which makes it look more 3D, which is always a nice effect. And then one more thing that you can use terrain paint for is to kind of divide some fields. It can be fields of flowers, it can be also fields of crops that you can just divide with your terrain paint. And that already ties in to the next tip, which I always find very, very useful, is that when I have a big terrain like this, it can be very overwhelming to want to place like plants somewhere. So for me, it's always helpful to kind of, I don't know, border out different fields of plants or crops or flowers or whatever. So what I like to do is I take a border piece, for example this like grass or a pretty neutral bush, and then I go around that area that I'm going to do next like a border. And one amazing tip that I learned from the wonderful Miss Unfortunate, big shout out there, is that you can fill these borders or the inside of these borders a lot quicker if you use a little keyboard combination. So what you're going to do is you will hold Alt anyways, because Alt allows you to freely place your flowers wherever you want them. So you hold Alt, but you also hold the Shift button. And what the Shift button does is that when you place a flower, it's immediately going to pick out this like kind of object or flower for you again. So when you hold both of them, you can just like freely keep placing a lot of flowers very, very quickly, which is very helpful to fill out large areas of landscaping. Okay, and now if you worked with the terrain tool, you can get these areas where the terrain is too steep for the normal terrain paint, and then you get these kind of ugly areas of like stone or dirt or whatever it places on that border, and you can cover that up with either plants or stones. There are some stones that I really like to use. For example, these debug stones from Eco Lifestyle are very, very handy if you can size them down a little bit more with the tool mod. I think they look very nice, but also there are lots of other stones or plants that you can use to cover up these steep areas. And one more thing that you can do with landscaping that is very, very handy is to use it to kind of frame the background of your build. So for example, you don't really like where the build is set, you don't really like the natural surrounding, or maybe you even like it, but you kind of want to frame your build a little bit, then you can use big rocks or crystals if it's a fantasy build, but you can also use big trees to kind of like size them up and yeah, kind of have a frame or a nice background for your build that doesn't look just like you just placed it there, but it kind of frames the build a little bit and also gives you control, which is very, very nice. And now we come to the second part of this building tutorial, finally, which is the shape or the shell of the house. And while you create the shape of the house, you need to think about the future of the build. So for example, while you create the shape, already think about the roof. The roof looks often best if you have one diagonal piece and then some front facing pieces, so make sure that you have some bump outs in the front that can translate well to a roof, to a nice looking roof. If you know that you want a porch, then keep that in mind, that your roof isn't covering anything up on the second floor, like the roof of the porch. Or if you, I don't know, just keep the roof in mind when you create the shape, and you can do fun things like, for example, have this two-piece like front facing thing. So you have this one bump out that goes out on the front, and then this bump out has another bump out. So what you can do with that is like have two front facing like roofs that like is one bigger and one smaller, and in some styles and in some builds that looks very, very good, but you already need to keep that roof that you want to do that roof in mind while you're doing the shape for this to work. Another thing that you should keep in mind are accent walls. So oftentimes it looks very good if you have a Sims build in just like one wall color, just like all stone or all like this paneling, but sometimes it adds a little bit more interest to your build if you use accent walls, which are walls that are kind of on top of that. Like oftentimes you have a main box of your house, and this main box is like one wall color or one wall paint, but then you have like your different bump outs, and these bump outs can have accent walls or accent colors that kind of give the build more visual interest from the outside. So when you create the shape, it is good to keep those accent walls in mind if you want to do them, because you can run into difficult situations. If you have a bump out on one side of the build where it's like a straight line of the build, and then you have a bump out, but behind the bump out there isn't more of like the vertical wall going on, but there's immediately the corner, so the bump out is a corner piece, then you have a problem with the accent wall, because what you don't want to do is have two walls of like different colors immediately next to each other without a divider. That doesn't look good. That doesn't look good in Minecraft. If you have like two different materials in your house in the same depth, it's the same in The Sims. If you want to change the color, if you want to change the material basically that the wall is made out of, you need a change in depth. You can't do it immediately like flat wall and then just like do a different wall paint. You need to divide it. You can, however, divide that with some wall decorations or some columns, then you can absolutely do that, but it's easier if you have a bump out specifically for that accent wall. And so while creating your bump outs, keep in mind that you don't put them on the corner, because then you're going to run into issues when you want to do your accent walls. And the next thing that you should keep in mind while you do the shape of a house is the window placement. If you have windows in mind, or you know, like I want some specific windows there, make sure that, for example, you want to have 3 windows next to each other on the bump out of the second floor, then of course it needs to be big enough for 3 windows, otherwise that's not going to work. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And also think about how much space you're going to need to do what you want to do on the inside. So for example, if you have a family of 6 Sims, you're going to need a slightly bigger house as if you just have 1 Sim, and just keep that in mind while you're creating your shape. Or for example, if you have a Sim that really wants an indoor basketball court, you are going to need the space for that, so keep that in mind while creating the shape. And also keep in mind the style that you want to go for. So it's very handy to use some reference pictures for the shape, and then you're going to see that, for example, if you want to go for a Victorian style, they often have big porches, they sometimes have towers, and oftentimes are very slim because of the way that builds were taxed in the Victorian era. If you want to build a fantasy build, there are also these big towers and more castle-like shapes. Or if you want to build a modern house, it's more like big clear shapes, and so that is also something that you should keep in mind for the shell of your house, which style you want to go for. And it's also completely fine and okay to use reference for the shape of your house. But when you use reference, always keep in mind that this is The Sims, you are not obligated to completely copy your reference picture. You can always make changes if that works better or looks better in The Sims. And the third part of the build that I want to talk about is the roof. And I know that some people are struggling with the roof and it can be very difficult on difficult shells, but I think there are some few rules that are also kind of easy rules that you can follow to make roofing easier for you. So follow the shape of the house. If you have a house that is like that kind of has a rectangular base and the sides are slimmer than the front, for example, you should place a roof. If you, for example, use a gabled roof, you can place the gabled roofs with the open sides to the sides that are slimmer. I don't know if I like explained that complicatedly, but if you have a rectangle and the sides are slimmer, you should have the opening of the gabled roof on the sides that are slimmer. And if you have a house where the front is slimmer, for example in a lot of Victorian houses, then the gabled roof is open to the fronts. And then if you, for example, have the first kind of house that is like broader to the sides and has the gabled roof open to the sides, in your shell, if you made it according to step 2, you are probably going to have some bump outs in the front. And then what you can do is use the roof and have it front facing on those bump outs to kind of give the roof more visual interest, and also have the possibility to place some windows in the roof that are facing to the front, which is very nice. But you can of course also use the other roof styles than the gabled roof, and that can also look very nice. But I don't have, like, I oftentimes like to use the gabled roof, especially when it comes to the front facing bump outs, because it just looks nice to have this opening to the front with the roof. I just like the look of it. And then what you can do for builds that are supposed to look older or weathered, you have the keyboard combination of Shift and C, and that one unlocks more curvature options for said roof, and then you can curve the roof to your heart's content. And then, for example, you have a section where you want one part of the roof be longer than the other part, then you can press Shift and just drag out that side of the roof. Or you, for example, want to have, like, for example, you're stuck with a difficult situation in a corner of the build. So in the corner you have a front-facing roof, but then a side-facing roof, and they intersect kind of weirdly. Feel free to use as many different roof pieces inside of each other as you want. So first you can have a little piece that just has the normal bump out in the front, and then behind that you can have a different kind of roof piece that has the sides sucked in, so that you don't have this as much of this weird overlap that you can get with gabled roof if they like kind of face diagonally onto each other, or like in a 90-degree angle onto each other. It can get weird, but there are easy ways to fix it, as you can see here. So to put it into easy rules, follow the shape of the house, try to have at least 1 or 2 front-facing roofs, and for older builds, curve the roof. And the next easy rule I would say is don't raise up the roof too high or too low. So for example, for Victorian builds you tend to have slightly higher roofs, and for, I don't know, medieval builds or suburban builds you are often more on like the lower side of the roof height. But don't go too extreme, just like, I don't know, stay somewhere in the middle. It can look very well if you go extreme. For example, for fantasy builds, if you have a roof on top of a tower and you put it up super high, it can look very cool and magical. Like, exceptions are often there, but just for a rule of thumb, don't go too high or too low with your roof height. Then the next step are roof decorations. I sometimes struggle with the placement of chimneys, but what I like to do is to have these little antennas or like lightning defenders. I don't know what the English word is. I just call it lightning defenders now, to place that on the roof, or these little, I don't know, just roof decorations can help your roof to look more interesting, but you in general don't need them. They're just like a little added bonus, a little plus. And if you have flat roofs, for example, for a modern build, what you can do is to choose island living again if you have it. And in island living, there are these glass floor pieces that you can also place inside of a flat roof that you can, for example, make with the platform tool, and then you can place these windows and you have very nice skylights in your modern builds. You can also make skylights in suburban builds or other builds with the normal roofs, but that's a little bit more difficult. So you can make separate roof pieces and then, for example, leave one out in the middle and then make this one a glass roof, and then you have a nice skylight. But what you need to keep in mind for the modern version of the skylight is that if you use platforms, the glass like flooring tile is not going to recognize the depth of said platform correctly, so it can look a little bit glitchy from the inside, but if you don't put the platforms too high, it should look fine also from the inside. And then a last itty bitty roofing trick that I learned is when you have a build where it's very important that when you look at the roof from below, that there's not this ugly white showing that is like by default on the downside of these roofs. Use thatched roofs if that goes with your style, because the thatched roofs that we have also have textures on their underside. So if you need like a dark, almost black roof, choose the black thatched roof, and then when you look down from down to the roof up, then you're going to see that there's the same dark roof color also on the inside. And now we get to step 4, wall paint and wall decorations, which I already talked about a little in the shell portion. So choose a main wall color that you put on your like main box of the house, and then work with accent colors to give it all more interest, I guess, and show look that they kind of fit together. What I do, for example, for European houses, we often have like a stone foundation of the house, so the main box is going to be stone and like solid, but then sometimes people want to add to their build and like add new wings to the build, and then those ones I sometimes do with like pure colors, like they're just like covered up with this thing that you just like do for flat colors, or you have like wood tiles or wood panels on these like accent pieces or newer wings of the house. And then ivy gives your build age and character and can cover up areas where there, for example, is no window for interior purposes. So ivy is really something that I can recommend. I think the most beautiful ivy that we currently have in the game is the debug ivy that we got from university, but if you can like size up and down the ivy that we got like in the base game, or also with Get Together, or I think also with the Vampires pack we got some ivy, then you can also create very nice shapes of ivy on your build walls, even if you don't have island living, not island living this time, even if you don't have university, or if you don't have access to debug for some reason. And then when it comes to the placement of windows and doors, sometimes it does make sense to create the floor plan, which we're going to talk about next, before placing the windows. But if you don't really care about the floor plan and just want the build to look good from the outside, then try to always place the windows kind of in a pattern. So if you have bump outs, place them in the middle of the bump outs, or if you have like more flat walls, try to go with the same pattern on the first floor and the second floor, and just try to go for a little bit of symmetry in the window placement. I think that oftentimes looks best if there's like patterns and symmetries that your brain can find. The flowers that you can put underneath the windows oftentimes also give it like a little bit of beauty and a nice touch. I really like to place these little flowers, little flower pots underneath the windows. It can also make the build look more aged, by the way, because modern builds often don't have this. But if you have a medieval build, it's like almost guaranteed that it's going to have these flower pots underneath the windows. But if you have a change in wallpaper without a change in depth, for example without a bump out or in a modern build, it is very useful to separate these different wallpapers with columns or wall decorations so that they don't look like two different kinds of wallpapers like on a flat wall immediately next to each other. Also, columns are not only useful for this change in wallpaper, columns on the corners of your build can also frame the build very well, give it like some definition, maybe some contrast, and that can basically elevate your build a little further if that's what fitting to the style of your build. Now, when it comes to the floor plan, so step 5 of building this house, it's also kind of important to keep in mind the story of the house, like the use of the house, like how many Sims are living there. Is this maybe a farm or there was a stable once? How old is the build? Which style is the build in? That's going to give you lots of information for the floor plan too. So for example, if you know that you're going to need to have lots of Sims, maybe it makes sense to have the master bedroom or at least one bedroom maybe for grandma in the first floor, so to have it like age appropriate, that they don't have to go through like stairs all the time. Or maybe if it was a stable once, you have like huge open spaces, even in an older house. In modern houses you often have like open floor plans, like open living, kitchen, dining room, like all in one room, which is very modern. Or if you have an older house, try to go with like separated rooms for every like activity, and also like more narrow hallways and more hallways in general. I think in modern floor plans there aren't really like designated hallway spaces oftentimes. You just like get into the house and it immediately is like maybe an entrance and then it opens up into the like this huge space, whereas in older builds, if you do them, you can often have like a narrow hallway that kind of like curves around and tries to connect all of the different rooms. So hallway spaces are more important in like these older style houses. And yeah, I think that's like a lot of input. But if you're like really lost at a floor plan, try to look at real life floor plans and get some inspiration. Think realistically what would work for you, what would you want in your floor plan. And then the last step that you're going to need to complete this house is the interior, like the furniture, the interior design. But I still have a lot to learn when it comes to interior decoration. Like I am just starting to look more into like interior design and architecture, and to really like embrace that and learn more and push myself. So I at this point in time don't really feel qualified to give you like tips and tricks for interior design. There are lots of other amazing simmers out there that have amazing like interior design tutorials or just speed builds with the most amazing interior designs. Like some people that come to my mind spontaneously are Passerine, Paul Pancake, and Eva Rodkey, that just always have such beautiful interiors. So look at Sims creators that inspire you for interior design is one advice that I would give. And another thing is that don't only use inspiration pictures for the exterior, which was what I often did at the start, like have these huge inspiration pictures and beautiful exteriors and then just wing it for the interior. No, just take every room, also like do your research of the style of the house, and then go and find inspiration pictures for the separate rooms, and that's going to elevate your interiors immediately. And yeah, that's maybe I'm going to do an interior design tips and tricks video for my 2-year anniversary, but yeah, I still have lots to learn. I still hope that from the exterior you could learn a little bit with me of like or take something that's like useful to you from what I've learned the last year for the exterior. If I missed missed something, I can always like answer questions about building if you have any in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here with me for a large or a small portion of my so far 1 year journey here on YouTube. I really love and appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. I hope you liked and enjoyed this video. If you would consider subscribing, you would make me super duper happy. I hope we'll see each other again.